The Arc Lash Sorcerer is still completely viable in the mid to late game in Season 4. Let's go over it together and talk about its new shortcomings. Now, the main skill you're using in this build is just Arc Lash. It's actually very simple, and we'll go over that in the gameplay section. But the rune that you use for this is Glinting, because every time you hit a stunned enemy, all of your cooldowns are reduced. As you can imagine, as we build up attack speed and stuff, this gets pretty crazy. We'll explain that later. On the next segment, we only have 1 point into Chain Lightning for destructive Chain Lightning, and 1 point into Charge Bolts because of destructive Charge Bolts. Now, this is going to reduce the damage that your enemies deal whenever they're hit by these charge bolts that get cast from your overflowing currents or overwhelming currents. That ability is called Unstable Currents. I almost never say that goddamn thing right. Anyway, we go Shimmering Flame Shield, Shimmering Teleport, and you want to max that one out. We also end up enchanting Teleport, by the way, because who doesn't love mobility? Obviously, you go Glass Cannon. I don't know a single Sorcerer build that you don't use Glass Cannon on, and then we just have 1 point into Ice Armor. You don't need the enhanced Ice Armor because you're not consuming mana with this build. On the next tab, we have 1 into Lightning Spear. Lightning Spear is awesome. It actually applies vulnerable every time it crits something, and you do as naturally as any Lightning Sorcerer build. You've got a ton of critical hit chance. You also want to go the Lucky Hit Chance one because this ends up becoming really important with the Ball Lightning proc. We'll explain that later. And because of Lightning Spear, we use the Mastery that's in this tree. And finally, Protection. Protection is awesome. Always use it, or you end up like me. That's a terrible joke. I'm a planned father, and I love my child. Anyway, on the next part, the thing that we max out, obviously, is Ball Lightning. And the Lucky Hit Chance is every time you crit, you have a chance to spawn a free Ball Lightning. So you see this build kind of starts to snowball. I'm sure you've seen a video on this before, but this is just the kind of revised to go over the, again, shortcomings, if you will. If that's even a term you can use for this build. Anyway, Wizard's Ball Lightning is awesome. Every time if it hits something 4 times, you get another crackling energy. We use those that applies more damage. It's cooldown reduction. It all works out in the end. So make sure you go Wizard's Ball Lightning. And then to double, triple, or quadruple dip into crackling energies, you go Static Discharge. On the final parts of the skill tree, we have Unstable Currents and then 3 points into Electrocution. Enemies deal less damage every time you hit them with a critical hit. So they're going to be getting damage reduction from your crits, and they're also going to be getting damage reduction every time you use Unstable Currents if you get lucky enough to have your Charge Bolt hit enemies. That right away is like 40% damage reduction that you get basically for free, and that's not using any of your cooldowns. And Unstable Currents doesn't really count because you kind of have it available at almost all times. It's a little weird now, but it's still super viable. That being said, the key passive is Overflowing Energy. This makes it so every time you pick up any of your crackling energies, your ultimate is cooled down just that much more. So you really do have a decent amount of uptime as long as you're not just fighting bosses. If you're fighting multiple mobs, it makes it a lot easier. Now, the main aspects that you want to use, this build is heavily reliant on attack speed, so Rapid on a Necklace is probably the most important, followed very closely by Overwhelming Currents. A few of the other offensive aspects that you should be going for are Storm Swell, Conceited, and Gravitational. For the defensive aspects, you go with things like Snow Veiled and Disobedience, and then with this one, you can go with Might because you're using a basic skill, so that gives you more innate damage reduction. Now, as a brief summary, stats in Season 4 are all simplified, so it's easier to understand for everybody. But the stats that you need on this build are very simple. You just need cooldown reduction and attack speed, and that's pretty much it for your offensive abilities. And you need the absolute most of both of those to make this build fully viable in Season 4, because I'll talk about this in a second, but they greatly nerfed the way that Ball Lightning works. It's like 3 times worse than it used to be. The defensive stats are always, again, cooldown reduction because you want to use your cooldowns defensively if you can. Damage reducing stats like armor and or all resistances, and then finally any bonuses to your maximum life. Now, for the Paragon board, I can talk about having personal independence all day, but I also like to lean on Max Roll for using their Paragon boards. They're really nice for figuring out or not figuring out yourself just where to put your points, kind of just stuff it, set it, and forget it. I do like to tailor my own experiences, like the final 20 or 30 points, I kind of just put wherever I feel I need them. If I need more damage, I kind of go oriented around that. But if I feel like I'm dying or I'm made out of paper, then I'd go and obviously take care of that. Now, the way they have this set up is on the first board, you go with Elementalist Glyph. The second board, which is Enchantment Master, you go with the Reinforced Glyph. The third board is Static Surge, and we go with Territorial. Fourth, we have Ceaseless Conduit with Control. Up next, we have Burning Instinct with Destruction. After that, there's Elemental Summoner with Exploit. And then finally, it's Frigid Fate with the Charged Glyph. Now, I can't say this enough, but you can really go any way you want when it comes to the Paragon board. This is just the way that I like to do it, and I like to follow the ones on Max Roll. They're very helpful. They're super nice people. You can ask any of them questions anytime you want. Just enjoy them. Now, for some of the end game gear, we obviously have Raiment of the Infinite. This is a really good one. You just pull everything in, and it does its job. Everybody knows what Raiment of the Infinite does. Now, something that's kind of unique on this one is you go Flicker Step, because every time you evade through things, your Unstable Currents gets a better cooldown. And if I'm not mistaken, that goes up to like 10 seconds every time you use evade, which means in reality, you should have almost infinite uptime on your ultimate. Obviously, another one of the pieces that we like to go for is Tal Rasha's. It belongs on every single sorcerer build from start to finish. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're playing. And then finally, we have Essadora's Overflowing Cameo. This one's super cool because it makes a sweet little Nova every time you pick up a Crackling Energy. And this build is kind of oriented around producing as many of those crackling energies as possible, so it just compounds into this absolute awesome looking cascade of destruction. Now keep in mind, this is actually part of like the core concept of this build, and you need this in order to push higher these days because of the nerfs to ball lightning, so look out for this. The playstyle for this build, I will admit, is one of the easiest I've ever played. You simply run around and Arc Lash everything. There's not really anything else you do. You just melee swing at everything you see. You only need your cooldowns for defensive or mobility, and your ultimate should be used anytime it's available, and you, in theory, can have 100% uptime on it if you have the right gear. Objectively, with attack speed and cooldown reduction prioritized, this build is still a force to be reckoned with. Without it, however, it's one of the slowest of the bunch, and I hate to say it. But again, this is mostly due to the ball lightning fixes and or changes that they did. I think it does like 3 times less the amount of ticks that it used to. But either way, I put this up on the pit clapometer and it put up a very sluggish 6 minutes and 2 seconds on average. Now keep in mind, this is with absolute 0 stat optimizations or anything like that, but that's still kind of slow for a base build. In my opinion, this whole build is pretty far from one of my favorites to play, and I didn't really get a whole lot of like the thrills or the frills that I get with any other build I've played in the entirety of Diablo 4. And while it really shines in certain aspects of the game, it just really isn't for me. I'm giving this a personal opinion, a personal 3 out of 10 for Season 4. And I know people are going to yell at me for that one, and that's totally okay. But really, my question is, what are you playing this season in Diablo 4? If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to this channel and like this video because it's free and it really helps us out here. And if you want to hang out with me live, I do try to stream like once a week here on YouTube, but the best way to stay keen on where I am or what I'm doing is join my Discord and pay attention to the announcements tab in there, or let's be friends. It's up to you. You can figure out what you want to do with that one. But all in all, thank you so much for taking... What the fuck am I counting out here? But all in all, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube recommends this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.